Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be able to be with you this morning. I've got a cold, but I'm usually better in the mornings than I am in the evenings. So it was necessary for me to miss services last night, and I hate that. But somehow, about 3 o'clock every day, I have the dropsy. Well, actually, we're going to study about dropsy today, but I don't have dropsy, but I have my cold gets worse. And so, but we're here and we can study a while this morning. This program is Prove All Things. We're having a Bible study in the 14th chapter of Luke. We're going to start Luke 14 this morning. And there I come. I think Poncho's actually switching it over to this. And my name, of course, is John Welch. And this program is brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ. That happens to be at 3103 North High School Road in Indianapolis. And you can participate. And considering the state of my voice, which is kind of gravelly, I would really love to have you participate. You could call on the phone and just about take over. We're going to monitor chat on this YouTube thing for your comments and questions, and thus you can be involved in the class. You can also use the comment section on this YouTube thing during the week, and you can reach us at 317-257-3000, 317-257-3000, or at 1-800-423-2484. And you can also email us at proveallthings@comcast.net. And we would like to have you come out and be with us. And Pancho should have shown you that slide that shows you these things, but he's not doing that today. He says he already did, and I haven't been paying attention. But anyway, we're looking forward to talking with you. We are, as I say, in Luke 14. Let's read the first few verses. I'm going to try to get through verse 14 today, if we can. It came to pass as he went into the house of one of the chief Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath day that they watched him. And behold, there was a certain man before him which had the dropsy. And Jesus answering spake unto the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? They held their peace. He took him and healed him and let him go. And answered them, saying, Which of you shall have an ass or an ox fallen into a pit, and will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? They could not answer him again to these things. And he put forth a parable to those which were bidden, when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them, When thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bade thee and him come and say to thee, Give this man place. And thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room, then when he that bade thee cometh, he may say unto thee, Friend, go up higher. Thou shalt then thou shalt have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Then said he also to him that bade him, When thou makest a dinner or a supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, nor thy kinsmen, nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and a recompense be made thee. When thou makest a feast, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. Okay, that's, I think, about as far as I can mark off that we can get today in the time that we have allotted. This phrase, instead of saying really one of the chief Pharisees, it should be rulers of the Pharisees, but the translators, probably because they realized that the Pharisees really had no rulers, There sort of was an equality among them, or a pretended equality, and thus they changed that translation for what it would have been more directly. He said they invited him to eat bread on the Sabbath. Now, this was a put up job. They weren't sincere in this. They had set up a situation where they were testing him, and I think Jesus probably realized it. But these Sabbath meals, entertainments, were sort of a luxurious, a joyous thing among the Jews, and really were considered by the Jews as a sort of religious duty. They had a duty to do this. All the food was cooked on the previous day, according to Exodus, the 16th chapter, and verse 23. It had to be cooked because you couldn't be cooking on the Sabbath day. And the fact that Jesus accepted this was due to, I think, a forgiving sort of spirit, friendliness. And as a result of it, we have account to this conversation that he had with these people. Every incident and every remark of the banquet was turned to good. First of all, there's the scene of the house in the first 6 verses. Then the maneuvers to secure precedence at the meal. And then the lesson about that we read today through verse 14 about who to choose as a guest. And then one we're not going to get to today, the parable of the king's feast that goes down through verse 24. The text says, and they watched him. It says he went into the house of one of the Pharisees and they watched him. The original really suggests the idea they were carefully watching. You can see other cases of this. We've seen other cases where the same sort of thing has happened in Luke. In the 6th chapter of Luke, in verse 7, the scribes and Pharisees watched him whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might find an accusation against him. Apparently, they were doing the same here. It was a malignant sort of heresy hunt, and so it's sort of surprising that the Pharisees would behave in this way, that they had forgotten some of the things that the Old Testament said. I'm going to drink more coffee than usual this morning to try to keep things fluid. In Psalms 37 and verse 32, the wicked watcheth the righteous and seeketh occasion to slay him. And then again in Isaiah 29, all that watch for iniquity are cut off, that make a man an offender for a word, and lay a snare for him that reproveth in the gate. That's what they were trying to do. They laid a snare. Now verse 2 says, behold, there was a certain man before him, which had the dropsy. 2 or 3 things. First of all, the modern word for dropsy is it was edema. It was, the word comes from the word water. And so it was a holding of water. It is occasionally accompanied by a rash, and it can result in death. It would have been an ugly scene. He would have been swollen, and as I say, probably broken out in a rash as a result of this. But at a lot of these meals, there was just not only the people who were invited to the meal, but they would allow other people to sort of circulate around the meal. And this man was not one of the guests. He apparently was a set up situation, and Jesus realizes it immediately, sort of in a flash, that what they've done is they've set this man up in front of him. For instance, it says, behold, there was a certain man before him, which had the dropsy. They set it up to see whether he would heal him. And he realized their purpose. He realized their intent. And he reasoned it out pretty quick. They would have argued that he couldn't ignore the presence of a man that they had sort of conspicuously stuck in front of him. In fact, he might fail in the cure. They really regarded this particular disease as incurable, or at least very difficult to cure. And if he did heal the man on the Sabbath day, there would be room for another charge before the Sanhedrin. And the Lord, as he was on other occasions, is so angry against this scheming on their part because they were making a tool of human misery and shame. And so Jesus realizes it, and instead of healing him, he first of all turns to the guys who set it up. He says, he spake unto the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? He put it up to them. And we've seen so many times, of course, throughout this gospel and all the gospels, that their prejudices about the Sabbath day, that these Sabbath day disputes were so childish and so formalistic. They had sunk from a religious ordinance that they had made it a sort of national institution and a badge of pride. And this question of Jesus, right away, just kaboom, defeated that. It deflated it. And if they said it's not lawful to heal on the Sabbath day, there were so many refutations of that they could be made. They had already undergone that sort of refutation. If they said it is lawful, then their plot came to nothing. It was just a ridiculous plot. And so they're in a pickle. They're in the horns of a dilemma. And so in verse 4, they held their peace. They can't say anything. They can't say it is lawful. They can't say it isn't lawful. They're just kind of stuck. So he says they held their peace. If Jesus healed this man now, all they had to do was speak up and say, hey, it was unlawful. He asked them beforehand, is it lawful or not? And so now they can't accuse him. And so here they were, the big religious authorities among the Pharisees. Why didn't they speak up and say, hey, you can't do this. It's unlawful to heal on the Sabbath. So it says he took him and laying his hand on him. Rather, the idea is he took hold of him to perhaps single him out of the group. And then answering him, he said, which of you shall have an ass or an ox fallen into a pit and will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? I read one commentator who was saying that this expression should instead say a son or an ox, which seems fairly odd, but it's the same idea. That is, if their ass or their ox fell into a pit and they needed help, they needed assistance, they had to get him out, they'd get him out on the Sabbath day. It was not only a financial necessity, but it was important to their welfare. It was also an act of kindness to the animal as well. The labor would have been considerable. Anybody, I don't know if you've ever tried to move a horse or an ass or an animal that was a little stubborn to move and was in a hard spot to be moved, but it would have involved a lot of labor. And you'd have had to get 3 or 4 other people to help you get out a rope and tackle maybe to get him out, or get out shovels to dig him out. Uh, for instance, in Deuteronomy 22, verse 4, the law pertains to this. It says, "Thou shalt not see thy brother's ass or his ox fall down by the way, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt surely help him to lift them up again." So they realized that this is something that they did all the time. It was normal, and Jesus had answered their questions. And so in verse 6, they could not answer him again to these things. There wasn't anything to say. He had put them in a pickle. They had set this up, planning to try to catch him, or maybe hoping he would fail. He realized what they were doing, and sticks it to them. So let's go to the second one. There are 2 or 3 things that happened this week. He says he put forth a parable to those which were bidden, when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying to them, oh, I've lost my place here. Saying unto them, when thou art bidden of any man to a wedding. Now this could also be translated feast. They pretty well regarded the feast and wedding were almost interchangeable in their language, or in their speaking, quite a bit. He says, when thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of. Now, the word room here, I think, refers to seats, not necessarily rooms in the house. But they chose out, they were picking out the better seats, maybe closer to the host. And this is such a small little ambition. I got a bunch of grandkids in my family, and when we have a big meal, how many do I have, Dave? 13. 13, Pancho says over there. We got 13 grandkids. And of course, a bunch of sons, daughter, and in-laws and outlaws and all that. And we just can't all sit at the same table. And so we got kids over at one table usually, and then all the adults at another table. And I've noticed as some of these children begin to get older, they're sneaking up on 12. They don't really want to be at the kids' table anymore. They want to sneak up to the adult table and listen to all the conversation that's going on there. And I can remember that. The same thing is what's going on here. It's not childishness so much, but in any big party, maybe there's some important people there, and it's a greater honor to sit near them and be respected by them and so forth. Well, that's what they were doing. When they reclined at meals. There would be they numbered the tables around 2, 5, 8. The various chairs. They weren't word chairs. They were reclining bench sort of, and the host would usually sit at 9. So at the 9 position, so that the best spot would be 8. And here you had somebody who came in, and he'd sneak in. I know every now and then my grandkids will sneak in and they'll grab one of the seats at the adult table. And somebody said, no, there's not enough room. You've got to go down to the kids' table. And he'll slink away. Well, he wouldn't slink. He'll sulk away, wishing that he could move on up. They were doing the same thing as adults. And it was such a small little ambition that it really even affected the disciples, the apostles. Look at Mark 9 and verse 34. It says they held their peace, for by the way, they had disputed among themselves who should be the greatest. They were doing the same thing. Who would be the most important? Who would sit closest to the Lord? Who would be at the top? He says, and so he's preaching a lesson or teaching a lesson on humility. When there had been to many men to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. You sit down at the highest spot. It's really easy to say you can be moved down. The host of the meal can come to you and say, "No, I'm sorry, move on down. You need to let, this is a more important person. You need to let him sit at the head table." And so in Philippians 2 and verse 3, the text says, "Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves." And that's the concept that the Lord's trying to teach here in this particular case. He says, "And thou," they begin with shame, "thou begin with shame to take the lowest spot." Now, this is, by the way, this same principle is taught over in Proverbs, the 25th chapter, verse 6. Here it says, "Put not forth thyself in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. For better it is that it be said unto thee, Come up hither, than that thou shouldst be put lower in the presence of the prince, whom thine eyes have seen." One hates to be moved down and recognized as being sort of a grasper. Let me remind you again, you can get in on this discussion. We've got about, roughly, looks like, according to my watch, about 10 minutes left in today's program, and I'm sure Pancho would have told me if something was coming up, but I don't see it here just yet, and I close that out. Pancho will shoot me for closing it, but I'll maybe be able to get back there. I got back there all right. It's okay. We're all right. The Lord, verse 10, "When they're bid go and sit down in the lowest room, that when he that bade thee cometh, he may say unto thee, Friend, go up higher. Then thou shalt have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee." The Lord wasn't trying to teach just a sort of a calculating worldly politeness, but he was teaching them the necessity of humility. As he says in verse 11, he says, "Whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, but he that humbleth himself shall be exalted." Now, he's taught this over and over and over again in so many other places. For instance, Luke 13, verse 30, just chapter back, "There are last which shall be first, and there are first which shall be last." Same idea. In Luke 1 and verse 52, I believe this is in the Magnificat, if I'm not mistaken. It may be in Mary's prayer. "He has put down the mighty from their seats and exalted them of low degree." And repeatedly through the book of Proverbs, you can read it over and over again. And so in 1 Peter 5 and verse 5, "Likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble." Well, let's go on into this third incident here at the dinner, third lesson the Lord taught. He says, "Then said he also to them that bade him, When thou makest a dinner or supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, neither thy kinsmen, nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and a recompense be made thee." Now the Lord, the Lord is not saying that he's not forbidding the common hospitalities between kinsmen. I just told you I invite my kids over to eat every now and then. The hospitalities that exist between brethren and our friends and business associates. Rather, this is, I've talked about this on other occasions. This is sort of that not but construction I've seen that perhaps I've called to your attention before, which does not necessarily rule out the former, but it emphasizes the latter. So here you have, when you make a dinner, call not thy friends, but in verse 13, but when thou makest a feast, call the poor. So it's not ruling out being hospitable to your friends, but it's saying this is more important. You're neglecting the more important. It's only a selfish generosity that you're involved in by calling your friends and maybe the rich, thy rich neighbors, nor your kinsmen, so that they can restore, that they can recompense, they can invite you back. And I've seen, I've perhaps had that every now and then. I've said, well, my goodness, we've invited him over 3 or 4 times. They hadn't invited us over to their house. Well, that isn't exactly what the Lord wants. Now, maybe between equals or whatever, at some point you might realize the need to get involved in this hospitality thing. But that's not the hospitality the Lord is recommending on this occasion, that I invite people to my home or that I be generous to them so they'll be generous back to me. So it's that not but construction that, he's discouraging this interested hospitality to secure return. And he's emphasizing an unselfish generosity as being superior. And there's just a host of instances where you can see this sort of construction being used in many instances. So sometimes that not denies a thing absolutely, but sometimes it is comparative. For instance, let me give you an example. In 1 Corinthians, well, I lost my place. 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 17, that's where I want to be. Christ sent me not to baptize, but to preach the gospel. What? Paul didn't baptize anybody? Yes, he did. He just, for instance, there in 1 Corinthians 1, he's just cited the fact that he baptized several people. And another couple of examples of this sort of construction. Let me see if I got to get where I can read it here. Look at Matthew 9. Go and learn what that meaneth. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. I am not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Now, that doesn't mean that the righteous don't need to repent, but it's simply a comparative sort of thing in that instance. In Jeremiah, well, I can, you can repeat this over and over again. And I'm not going to do that. Perhaps you get the point. I've been known to belabor a thing to death. He says, when thou makest a feast, call the poor. Call the poor. In Matthew 25, in verse 35, at that scene of the division from the sheep, from the goats, he says, I was hungry and ye gave me meat. And I was thirsty and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger and ye took me in. So the Lord's saying that that's the sort of person you want to be, is the sort of person that helps the poor, the man who can't recompense to you again. So that it's not just a selfish hospitality that you're offering to be invited again. Okay, and then he goes on, of course, we're going to finish in verse 14. Thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. So if you're concerned about recompense, the Lord says, labor not for the meat which perishes, but for that which endures to eternal everlasting life. And here it is. It is a hospitality shown to the poor, and that cannot be returned again. We're just about out of time. We want to invite you to our services on the Lord's Day We're going to be meeting at 9:30. Brother Alan McKee, who's with me usually on Tuesday nights, is going to be teaching in our adult class, one of our adult classes in the book of Genesis. And I believe, I forgot what he said. He's talking about he's talking about Jacob and Laban. Jacob, Laban, and Leah, and so forth. I think that's the 27th chapter. And then, of course, at 10:30, we'll have a worship service. Again, at 6, another worship service. And this will be at 3103 North High School Road at the High School Road Church of Christ. And I managed to get through this without any terrible things due to my cold. The golf clap from Poncho over there. I wish I could have been with you last night. Hopefully I'll be better by the Lord's day so we can worship the Lord together on Sunday. If the Lord wills, we'll be with you then. Good day to you.